So this is the Suitcase of Poetry project. And today, Raine, Geoghegan and Fiona Bolger, me, will be speaking about our poetry and the magic of words and the power of words and how words at times have been life and death for some people, and how much value we can put on words. And when we hand our words to someone and they breathe into them, the power and the respect that that can bring. Raine, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Fiona, and thank you for inviting me on this wonderful journey with you. So my name is Raine Geoghegan. I'm a poet, prose writer, and I occasionally teach workshops in performance skills. And I turned to poetry when I became very ill with chronic disease and disability. And prior to that, I was on the stage, acting, dancing, directing, running a women's theatre company. And I've been on this sort of poetry journey for some years now, and I'm finding my feet with it. And I'm always astonished how much there is to discover about words and poetry in particular. Now, I met Fiona at the Poetry Island Review. We both had a poem in that journal. And it was also the 40th birthday party in Parnell Square in Dublin. Yvonne Boland was the editor and I got to meet her, which was wonderful. And I was just sort of passing through the building and I bumped into Fiona, who sort of commented on my work. And since then we've been in touch and sharing our ideas about poetry, just keeping in touch with what we're both doing. So yes, I'll hand back to you, Fiona, about that sort of meeting that we had in Ireland in 2018 in December.
Oh, wow, that's so long ago. And it's something we haven't been doing for a long time, is just bumping into people. But I'm so glad we had that opportunity. And it was really funny because I had been through the book, the Poetry Ireland Review, and I had picked out my favorite poem and I was just showing it to some friends when you walked by. And I don't know how I knew it was you, but we started chatting and I think you said, "I'm Raine," and I said, "Oh my gosh." And I had my finger in the Poetry Ireland Review and I said, "Look what I've been looking at." And it was so exciting because it's really unusual that I meet the poets whose work I love. I'm always reading work all the time and I'm surrounded by poets in my head, but then to kind of find a poem and go, hey! So if you don't mind, today it would be absolutely wonderful to hear that poem,
Okay.
The Greenhouse. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. The Greenhouse. Mourners spill out into the alleyway. Amidst the black are flashes of purple and red of women's scarves and men's ties. My uncle, a staff sergeant in the army and just back from Germany, is dressed in his uniform. He leans against the kitchen wall having a smoke. We drink tea laced with whiskey. My aunts dry their tears on freshly pressed white handkerchiefs. I go into the sitting room and see my sister sitting on a stool, her hands clasped tightly on her lap. The coffin is open. Grandfather is in his best suit. His pocket watch hangs from his top pocket. A family photograph is tucked into his waistcoat, close to his heart. His old hip flask lies at his side. No doubt there will be a little whiskey in there. He still wears his gold ring. He looks as if he's resting, as if he'll sit up at any moment. I place my hand gently on his. Grandfather and I are walking down the path to the greenhouse. I am 6 years old. It's a hot day. I'm wearing my shorts. Weeds and wildflowers tickle my ankles. He pushes the door open, ushers me in, points upwards. "What do you think of the grapes, my girl?" Tilting my head back, I see huge bunches, deep red, ready to be plucked. He reaches up, pulls a few down, rinses them in a bowl of water, then places them in my hand. I bite one and the juice runs down my chin. I eat 2 more. "They're lovely, Grandfather." He smiles, opens a can of beer, takes a mouthful and says, "Do you see these grapes? Do you know why they're so tasty? I shake my head. Well, it's because the mullah watches over 'em. He laughs, I laugh, but I'm not sure who the mullah is. I finish my cup of tea and tell Granny that I'm going down to the greenhouse. The door is slightly ajar, the white paint faded, flaking. I push the door hard, go in and smell sawdust, stale beer and decay. There is an open can of pale ale on the shelf, alongside 3 broken brown pots. An old knife with a blue handle, its blade stuck in the wood. It's the one he used to carve the wagons with. I bend down, pull an old crate out, and in front of me, the unfinished wagon. Taking a tissue from my pocket, I wipe the dust off. It's painted red, green, and yellow. Tiny faded net curtains hang limply against the small windows. The front door has minute horseshoes attached to it. All the Romanis believe them to bring good luck. I would love to have this wagon. Before I leave, I look up to where the grapes used to grow in abundance. All that is left is a dried, tangled vine hanging loosely from the roof.
I get goosebumps hearing that. I just think the relationship between, you know, grandparents and grandchildren and the way in which things are handed on is just so powerful. And across communities, that power is there. And, you know, such a different experience maybe growing up to mine, but still my grandfather used to sit in a glass house, and there was always that smell of the beer fermenting, because he used to make his own beer. And he was always chanting poetry. He was a great fan of Seamus Heaney and Betchman and Chaucer particularly, and he had records of Chaucer. And he used to recite the Chaucer to me. And as a child, it was just like listening to a song. And when I came to study Chaucer in college, in school, and then later in college, I kind of knew some of it. And I was like, what? How do I know this? So just like we were talking before we came on air, that passing down of language from generation to generation, and the Vardo, the wagon, and holding on to it. So my poem is just a response to those wonderful words and that sharing. My grandfather quotes Chaucer from the vinyl, tells me little girls should be seen and not heard. I love him dearly, even when he comments on my short skirt. Some days he cries that only he is left alive. He worries he will die alone in the night. I am a teenager and stay out late, kiss my boyfriend on his couch. We eat cabbage and bacon together. He likes that I like his food. After he dies, they find my poem written for his birthday among his books. I've lost it now. So thank you so much for your poem, which reminded me of all these things, and the, you know, the bittersweet of that relationship. So I would, I'm really interested in how your poems are rooted in memory, and they seem to, you know, you remember your grandfather, the funeral, and then it brings you back to your childhood. And the next poem I'm going to ask you to read is somewhat similar. I'm really curious as to how you find those memories. Does something prompt them, or do they just land in your head, or how do those memories come to you?
Okay, yes, thank you, Fiona. And I did really love that poem, so evocative. And I sometimes call some poems heart-centered poems, and that was a heart-centered poem, so I really could feel it here. So going back, yes, to my own sort of relationship to memory, I think the memories I have of my grandparents are very vivid, because when I was a baby, I was born in South Wales, and my father died when he was 27. So my grandfather had to drive his red lorry from Middlesex in England all the way to the Welsh valleys and bring my mum and myself back. My mum was pregnant at the time too. And so we lived with my grandparents for about sort of 7 years. So of course, all those early memories are still very much, you know, I've embodied them, so to speak. And my grandfather, I suppose, was a bit like a father figure to me. And so when I sort of sit down to write a poem, I've usually got a memory in mind, and it's then easy to sort of cultivate that memory and go in and sort of explore it further. Now, there are some poems where my memory doesn't sort of match up to my will, so I often do a bit of research, speak to distant cousins or aunts, that sort of thing. And what I also do is I do what's called a sort of a channeling. So what I'll do is I'll imagine that I sort of like call forth my granny or my great aunt or my great granny, who I don't really remember that well. I just remember a sort of a figure and the way she was dressed. And I sort of call forth, and I will sort of ask them questions and imagine I'm having a cup of tea with them. And then after a while, I just start to get little ideas, and I just start to jot that down, journal them, and then that then finds its way into my poetry as well. So I've got different sorts of techniques, but yes, I have got quite vivid memories, particularly of my grandparents.
And that word mullah, which you mentioned in that poem, so that it's kind of like they are with you, as your grandfather predicted,
Yes,
in a way.
yes,
Isn't that lovely?
exactly.
Alice Walker talks about that as well, the calling forth.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
It would be so lovely if you could read that wonderful poem now, a song to rest the tired dead, if you'd
Yes.
like to.
Okay. A song to rest the tired dead, in memory of Celia Lane. It is dusk. She has come to wash the body. A table is set by the bed. A bowl of lavender water, clean muslin cloths, a white towel. Too young for death, she thinks, as she removes all the clothing and jewelry from the body of her niece. She notices stretch marks on the thighs, how the breasts have dropped from feeding the chavies. 40 years ago, just been born, sucking at her dyer's breast. Taking a cloth, she dips it in water, squeezes it hard in her hand, sets about her task. Morts stand by the doorway, aunts, daughters, sisters, and the dyer, singing in low, soft voices, a song to rest the tired dead. She speaks quietly to her loved one as she gently cleans, lifting one arm up, then the other, holding it, placing it down carefully, as if it was made of glass. The others won't move too close. It is mockady to do so. This woman who washes the dead now holds both feet, letting them rest for a while, blessing them for all the miles they have trod the earth. She dresses her niece in the finest of clothes, combs her dark tangled hair, places the gold chain and earrings in the palm of the right hand, puts the wedding ring back on the third finger of the left hand. Such small fingers. Bending forward, kisses them. You are ready now, my girl. Sob well. And yeah, I'd just like to mention that the inspiration from that came once from a conversation I was having with my cousin Julie, who's helped me a lot with my work, because she has a really good memory. And we would talk, she reminded me about my great aunt Celia, who that poem is in memory of, who was always called in to wash the dead. So, you know, she's talking about my sort of cousin, my mum's cousin, Raya, who died in her late 40s. But again, Julie remembers it very well. You know, she remembers Raya coming over and she remembers Celia coming over and washing Raya's body. And I thought that was such an important part of my family history to write about. And, you know, Celia did this for many, many of the family. And then they would have that sort of sitting up all through the night, you know, and eating, drinking whiskey, talking about their loved one while the body was in the coffin, you know, which I think personally is a much healthier way than the way we do it in England now. So, yes, that's for Celia Lane, who used to wash the bodies.
Yeah, and you know what you're describing reminds me very much of an Irish kind of procedure or process around. And now I've never seen a body wash, but I've been in the houses when the bodies are there and people are moving in and out. So there's a quiet space where the body is, and people sit there quietly. But then other people are walking around, and there's endless cups of tea, and the neighbors send in food. But the thing I discovered when I was in India was the process there is exactly the same, and you're not allowed. There's a religious kind of rule that you may not cook or you may not make tea in the house. So the neighbors send in flasks of coffee, flasks of tea, you know, the equivalent of sandwiches. So you're kind of you're embraced by the community in that moment of sadness, and then people come and they go in a very gentle kind of a way.
Yes.
Yeah, so your poem reminded me of those moments twice in my life when I've been with people who were dying and who died as I was there with them. And so that was kind of, I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about those moments. But they had deep impact on me. One was when I was a teenager, my grandfather, and the other one was my very good friend who was my age, and she died, Vani Subramaniam, in India. So I will, yeah, so this is just a few notes about that. And yeah, after rains, a song to rest the tired dead. My grandfather's death, his last breath from the air I shared with him, filled with the scent of fermenting beer, tobacco, and poetry books. Vani's glance to me in the busy room as she quietly slipped away from her relatives, a final farewell to her husband. My 5-month-old sleeping in her pouch. These are my images for death. I wash them now and lay them out for all to see. The dead once lived as we. So thank you so much for bringing back those memories to me. I find your poetry does that for me. I know that you're bringing out, I know you've brought out 2 pamphlets recently, and I know you've another book coming out, and we have something in common there. Salmon are bringing out our new collections. Yeah. And I wonder if you'd like to tell us something about your new collection, and we're hoping, you and I, to have a joint Irish launch in June 2022. So fingers crossed, and pandemics allowing, etc., etc. Hopefully the mullah will channel through us. So maybe you'd like to say something about your new collection, and also the title poem of your new collection.
Okay. Thank you, Fiona. Yes, and that, again, your poetry is very moving, and again, I really felt that the closeness you had with your friend Vani really came across, and that image of your baby in the pouch. So my collection, my first collection with salmon, is coming out soon in March, and big thanks to Jessie Lendenny for taking me on, joining the salmon family. And the talking stick is the puckering kosh in Romany. Kosh is the stick, puckering is talking. And most of these poems are based on my Romany family or the general Roma population. And I've just brought together poetry from my pamphlets and new poetry, and really there's sort of songs in there, there's haibans, there's monologues. I'm a big fan of monologues, and it's so that the book itself has a sort of a rhythm to it anyway. And when I was talking to Jessie, she actually pointed out this idea, which I hadn't thought about before, but when I sort of said, you know, about the talking stick, the puckering kosh, how it's a ritual that in old Romanichal days, English Romany days, there would be somebody in the family that would sort of instigate it, and the blackthorn stick was made into a talking stick. I haven't got time to get it now, but hopefully show it to you another time. And this talking stick one end would be placed in the hand of the elder who was dying or coming near to the end of their life, and the other end would be placed into the youngest member of the family, so a baby or toddler. And it was said that the wisdom and knowledge will be passed through the stick. And it's not really connected to the First Nations custom of the talking stick. It's slightly different, but it does remind me, and pictures that I've seen on the internet are quite similar. So I thought, yes, you know, why don't I write about this? Now, I have no knowledge of this, so I don't have a memory of anyone doing this. So I had to sort of reimagine it from a child's perspective in the wagon, in the Bardo. So I'm going to read it now. It's called The Puckering Cosh. Me grandar is dying. We're packed tight inside the Varda. Dick at the old Giro, me cousin says. He ain't long for this world. Well, we all gin that. I'm crouching by the door when an old mush comes in, carrying a stick of blackthorn. Here's the Puckering Cosh, me granny says. She picks up the youngest, our Emily, and puts her on the bed. The old mush gives the cosh to me grandar, who can barely hold it. Me granny takes the chavies vase and squeezes the other end of the cosh into her little fingers. Everyone is quiet. The mush sings a gilly, where it's more like diddling to me. Me grandar lifts his head, smiles at Emily, then falls back with a gasp. No one moves. I'm holding me breath. The chavvy takes the cosh, waves it in the air. Me granny says, that's right, our girl, we gin what you're doing. She laughs, then roves. One by one they rove until they're all at it, and I breathe out. I whispers to me cousin, come on, let's gel and play in the poove. We get out of that Varda quick sharp. We leave 'em to it. So that's really from a young child's perspective of sort of being a bit like on the outside of it, you know, and sort of bringing in his own little sort of ways, which are quite sort of comical, really. And there's a lot of words in there which are Romany. Some poems have little Romany words, but this one has quite a lot. So Dick means to look, Giro is man. Gin, it's a very important word, Jim, because it means to know. To know. Vast is hand, gilly is song, diddlin is singing diddly dees, which my grandfather used to do, and a lot of Romany men and women used to do, still do. So it's a bit like diddly dee, diddly die, diddly 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 do, that sort of thing. Rove means to weep, gel or jal means come on, and poove is fields.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you know what's really interesting, even without the translations, it's so easy to understand and guess what the words mean. And Dick, of course, is so like the Hindi Dek, you know.
Yes. Yes.
So you know, Deco is you know, look, and so on. So it's so interesting. I love these resonances between languages. So it's so interesting how as humans we resonate on so many levels, you know, our emotions, our languages, our speech, all of these resonances. And when you can tune into them with another person, it's just, it increases the way you feel more deeply, I think. So thank you. So, and I love the way that kids are just running off, you know, it's like, oh, leave them at it. Yeah, let's go. It's got such a sad poem, but it's so much hope in it as well, the next generation. And I remember we came up with it because I was telling you that my friend Vani, on her deathbed, my daughter was there in the pouch, and we were talking about the older person and the younger person. And in many ways, she actually left her bangles to my daughter. So before she passed away, she had passed on these bangles, which I still have from my daughter. So it's interesting how we pass things down. So I thought that in my response, I would I suppose the poem that I came up with was my end. And in a way, it's also it's about an ending, but it's more like writing myself out of an ending. During the COVID, I got to a point where I couldn't write, I couldn't think, I couldn't do anything. And I was feeling like that was it. I was finished with all this writing lark, all this poetry nonsense, and that was it. I was just going to, throw away my pen and forget about it. And I started writing about that, and somehow I wrote myself out of it. And so that's the poem that I'm going to give you now. So it's called My End. My End. I am worded out. I've written my last poem. From now on, the words I pen will be prose, body bound, earthy, no flights of fantasy, too much grime on my window. The casual exchanges with passers-by while out walking will be translated into facts and figures, or maybe qualitative data, but no rhythm, no rhyme, and every line must reach the edge of the page. At no stage should sound or whimsy unsound move me from one line to the next, but simply the logic of reason. It shall be measurable and not a mix of guessing and consulting. No, I am done with poetry. Po, the river, the chamber pot, the making, the forming, the growing between the river mud of poetry and self-seeding trees. There shall be no more, no rhyme, only reason. And no season, no firing pots, no watering seeds and saplings. I shall sanitize, not fantasize. Hand in plastic glove, heart firmly inside chest, lung capacity at reasonably functioning, brain can go slow. I shall state the facts, each one in isolation, kept well apart from others, lest the fires of imagination should connect them and start a fire and fire the pots and engulf the trees which will survive. The seeds, at least beneath the soil, to sprout again and sapling themselves some buds, and leaf themselves some flowers, and bloom some fruits, which my mouth dripping can truly desire. And we're back with the grapes and the juice from the grapes coming down your face, and the orality, which we were talking about offline, and how your grandfather had given you the sound, like how he used to love the sounds of words, and your grandmother's joy at hearing all the words you had, and me learning words from my grandfather and my grandaunt and hearing the poetry from them. So I think in a way it's that very orality and that swimming in the sea of the words we share that kind of got me from that moment of complete depression back out and into the fires. So
well, that really came alive, Fiona, when you through your reading. It was like, because it was wonderful. When I first read this poem, I was recuperating from just having surgery for breast cancer, so I was feeling a bit like at my end at my end of something, and when I read your poem, it was interesting because I wasn't going really deep into the sort of the meaning of the words. What I felt is like the words were somehow being freed up around me, and I mentioned to you that I started seeing your words sort of on the walls and on the floors, and I highlighted some of them: body bound, earthy, sound or unsound, the river, growing, mud, self-seeding trees, pots, watering seeds, saplings, fire the pots, engulf the trees, beneath the soil, flowers, fruits, desire. And I underlined those words, and then I began to walk around my home, and it was a little bit like, I don't know, just sort of capturing a word here or there, or it's like they were like a backdrop of life and living. And I was struck by the thought of how poetry lives invisibly within us, that it's there, it's just out of sight until we write it down on the paper. So it was a sort of again, it was like, yes, embodying this poem in a way, sort of living with it for a little while. So yeah, but it was great hearing it too, really great. So
thanks for that. And I thought maybe as we were chatting, it would be just so lovely to hear maybe as our final poem, the puckering kosh is passed from poet to poet. And this last poem you wrote inspired by all of my poems, that I've written inspired by you. And Maya Angelou inspired this poem. And maybe again, it's that idea of these words everywhere. You've called it the word catcher, so maybe you can say something about that, and we can finish up there. Thank you
Yes,
so
thanks,
much.
Fiona. Yes, I think it's a nice way to finish up our session today, because I remember watching Maya Angelou on a TV program once, and I remember her saying about how words were sort of around her all the time, like in the ether, and she sometimes had to capture them. And so I like that idea of catching the words. And it was something I wrote when I was doing my master's at university, and I sent it to you. She sits quietly, waiting for words to rise like bubbles from the pit of her stomach. Some have hardened like stones, lingering in the darkness. They make no effort to come to the surface. Once they were free, floating in the forest with the leaves, warming themselves under the sun. Some fly out of her mouth, moths seeking the light. Others slither and slide, not knowing which way to go. Some jump like frogs onto the page, wet and beady-eyed. When she tries to grab them, they hop away. Words fly, fall. Like leeches, they stick to her clothes and make her cry. They swim, tiny fishes, through her veins into her fingers.
Oh, wow. I love that poem. And I love how the words, they fly, but they also slither, and they're also like leeches, and they're inside and they're outside and they're everywhere. And in some way, that's how words are. And also that idea that they don't belong to anyone, they are themselves. They live between and beyond and above and inside. And it's been so lovely to share, these weeks of chatting back and forth, and also this moment of sharing our work together. It's been really wonderful. Raine, thank you so much for opening your suitcase of poetry and allowing the words to emerge. And if anybody's interested, they can keep an eye out with Salmon for the talking stick, and we'll also put some links to where your other books are available, so hopefully anybody watching can follow you up. And thank you so much again.
Thank you, Fiona, for inviting me, for working with me. It's really helped me actually sort of with my recovery, just to sort of have that gentle connection with you, and there's been no pressure, and I've really enjoyed listening to your beautiful words, and just, yes, it's been wonderful. Thank you. Blessings.
Thank you also. Thank you so much.